Welcome to Rune Soup, a podcast about magic, culture and the paranormal, coming to you from sunny West London. My name is Gordon and I shall be your host. Enjoy. Today on Rune Soup, we have a special January episode for you. We'll be looking at the stars for 2016 and what insight we may glean from them. So I am pleased to introduce one of the occult world's most talented and visionary astrologers, Austin Coppock. Austin, how are you, sir?
I'm pretty good, Gordon. That was a very complimentary introduction.
Yeah, I was going to maybe... In some of the drafts of it, I'm like, should I call him handsome? No, it's too it's too soon in the series to just start creeping on guests. So I'm like, I'll just say something else. Anyway, so how are things in California this morning?
I'm just finding out. It looks relatively sunny. I can't see any of the methane gas, which has supposedly been saturating my local area. We have a big gas leak down here, apparently.
You'd think you'd be able to smell it. I've been watching that on the news, and you go, methane, that's one of the ones that it stinks. It's fascinating.
Well, I've only been in LA for a couple years, but I think I can say pretty safely that I'm not the only one who intentionally tries not to smell LA. Like, you don't go out in the morning and be like, that's some good Los Angeles. It's not as smog choked as it was in the 70s, but it's not like it's something you stop and intentionally lean down and quietly inhale and become invigorated and have your faith in life restored.
Stop to admire the pavements, that kind of thing. Not very. Yeah. Well, actually, you said you've only been there for 2 years, which kind of brings us back around to the traditional beginning question. Austin, were you a weird kid?
I was actually, I've heard you ask people that question before, so I was thinking about my answer this morning.
All right, well, I take the question back.
Well, so what I was thinking is that at least under a certain age, kids are always really weird. And that it's the normal ones. Like when you see like a really well-behaved, polite, thoughtful 4-year-old, I think that's really creepy.
Yeah, true. That's a serial killer in the making.
Right, but once we get to, high school or whatever the equivalent is where a person is at, you see the people who are falling in line and those who are trying to peel off for whatever reasons. I was probably a weird kid. Yeah.
As a kid, or are we talking about when you got to high school and decided I'm really going to push on this weird?
I think I tried to be normal until about 5th grade. So until about 10 years old. And then I kind of had this set of realizations that it was never going to work out for me. The being normal bit, the being weird has actually worked out quite well, shockingly.
So what were the 5th grade realizations where you're like, hang on a minute, this isn't for me?
Well, it's a good quote. I don't know that they're terribly original. I think it's the sort of thing that a lot of people think. They're like, even if I'm perfect at doing what everybody expects, I'm not going to get much out of it. The maximum reward for following all the rules is less enticing than just sort of the door prize for doing your own thing. Doing your own I hate to say just being myself, but just being what I was and doing what I was interested in. Like, I realized that I liked painting scary clowns and demons on the wall and reading nerdy science fiction books and all the stuff that was not cool where I grew up was quite pleasing.
So where did you grow up?
We moved around a bit, but the short answer is Ohio, particularly Mansfield, Ohio. It's about halfway between Cleveland and Columbus. It's it's kind of a sad Rust Belt town. At one time, I think maybe 50 years ago, there were 5 really big factories, and I think the last of the big ones closed down in 2000, I'm going to say 11. They're their GM plant, I think, closed down in 2011. And so now all we have is a maximum security prison.
Gotcha. That's less in the way of employment for a large and flourishing town.
Yeah, yeah. So between high school and college, when it wasn't certain that I was going to college, I worked at one of what they call like the light assembly factories, which is like I greased oven door hinge pieces before they were then bolted together. So this is not skilled or high paying labor. And I would I would drive by the prison every day on my way to work, and some of my workmates, some of the people I worked with, who'd been there for a while, they're like, "Oh yeah, that prison, like you want to get a job there, like that's where the opportunity is." And they were being quite serious. They're like, "You're a young guy, you're fit-ish, you need to look to the prison." And I was like, "Oh God, out of here." But it was a great metaphor. It was great because it was so clear, right? It wasn't this complicated situation that I really had to think my way out of. It's like, do I want to work at the prison? No, I don't.
Yeah, the clue is in the name. Was that actually a revelation? Like, I need to head out California way.
I didn't really know anything about the rest of the world. I actually had this sort of delusion that life and the world was basically shitty, based on where I grew up. And it's not that is entirely wrong. There is some basic shittiness to reality. But I thought everybody was as bad as where I grew up. And so I didn't have information about other places, or if it had come my way, I hadn't understood it properly. And so I just knew I needed to get out. And then once I did end up going to college, I was one of those kids with very poor grades and extremely high test scores. And so that kind of took some doing to get me on to that next level of education. And then I went to a school where we had to travel and do an internship somewhere about 5/12 of the time, so a little under half. So over the next 5 years, I lived in the northwestern United States, the northeastern United States, the deep south. Back to Ohio once. I lived in London for a summer. I went all over the place. And so I found out that I liked I liked everywhere better than the place that I'd grown up. It was really exciting. Like, there were some people who'd grown up cool places, and they were disappointed by what they discovered with this internship program. But I was like, no, it's great. Chicago is great, and Washington State is great, and even Georgia's great, and London's great.
I like it. The only way is up.
Yeah.
Yeah, very cool.
I'm sure there are worse places than where I'm from. It was just sort of, I would say, it's not, Mansfield's not like, it's not a horribly violent place. It's like a kind of violent place. It was, it's only a town of 50,000. So things only get kind of nasty there. But, yeah. Other than total hellholes, Anyway.
Cool. So at the time, I mean, that's after high school and then into college. Were you still reading your science fiction and doing the painting and so on through that period?
Yeah, I actually went to college with the not very accurate idea that I would be trained to be a painter, and that would be my profession.
I went to film school, so I know exactly that faulty logic. Well, surely the one thing standing between me and creative success is a degree. I'll go get that.
Right. Yeah, it was really, to be honest, I don't even think I was considering what a career was or how one might establish one. The painting was the thing that I most enjoyed doing. And so I'd study that in college, and I'm sure I told people that that's what I was going to have as a career, but I didn't really understand what a career was, or that it took years to build a sort of thing like that. I was more interested in skill.
Gotcha. See, that means that you went into it with a better head than I did, because I was like, yeah, yeah, famous filmmaker, that'll happen. That's what I will do immediately after college, I assume. No further questions.
That's great.
And the weird thing is, I got quite two-thirds of the way through it, because you said because you liked painting, you went into it. I got about two-thirds of the way through my degree, and I'm like, I don't even really like filmmaking. And kind of shifted it to sort of learn production skills and producing and so on. And I'm like, how did I? This has been a systemic mistake at every level, because I didn't even go. I mean, I learned techniques and they've been useful in their own way. Certainly the storytelling component of them. But I got two-thirds of the way through it. I'm like, I don't want to be a filmmaker. So yeah, well done. So when you talk about the science fiction you read, I mean, what leaps out at you from that kind of early age? What were the transformative texts?
Oh, Dune, obviously.
Yeah.
As far as transformative texts during my teenage years, I my parents, though in no way resembling hippies in the late 80s or early 90s, were pretty full-on hippie before I was born. They actually met they were both getting their masters in one of the only programs, Nancy's, that taught humanistic psychology, which is hippie psychology, if you know your history. Right, they were in this, and then by the mid '80s, mom had shoulder pads on and dad's hair was very short. Probably my fault for existing. But their library from their hippie days was still totally intact. And so they had all the Aldous Huxley classics. They had all of the Carlos Castaneda books, which had been released up to that point. They also had some Penske texts.
Oh, cool.
And so, yeah, I read... I remember reading a lot of Aldous Huxley, obviously Dune, and then those, these other texts, such as the Castaneda and the Ouspensky and a couple. Oh, and Robert DeRope, who was a student of Ouspensky, and that was a big thing for me because I'd always, I don't know if always, at least since I became a teenager, felt a huge dissatisfaction with let's call it the systems of meaning making that I found available. The religious culture of North Central Ohio, where I grew up, is pretty sort of, it seemed to me, standard Christian. It wasn't. People weren't. There was the occasional person who was pushy about it, but mostly it was just there. There's just a church on every corner. And I wasn't interested in that, and I hadn't been raised in that. My dad's family is they're I would say proud secular humanists, and my mom's sort of quietly mystical, we could say, but not in a way where there's a model of the world where, God happens or the mystical happens. She's just sort of like open to things. And so there was no sort of access panel for the weird at all for me. There's no conceptual system, and there's nobody there's nobody around me who kind of thought about things that way. And so reading texts like Castaneda and reading Ouspensky provided a way of thinking about more than just material reality without falling prey to kind of a boring Midwestern Protestantism.
Makes sense. So which was your favorite? When you say all the Castaneda books that were out, was there a particular favorite? I have even though the story of the guy didn't end super well, I have a reasonable amount of affection for those books.
Yeah, I read them all at once. There was about, there were like 3 months where I just read them all back to back. And so they're not that distinct for me. I remember
Yeah, fair enough.
I think no, I mean, there are a lot of moments I liked. It was one of the most powerful things was just, it was the only account of we call like a shamanic. I know that's a problematic word when we use it. It was the only account of a shamanic reality that I'd encountered and did encounter for quite some time. And just having the idea that any of that was even half possible and part of the way that reality worked, was quite helpful. It was quite helpful.
Did you pull on those threads over the next subsequent years, in between reading those books in Ohio and ending up working in astrology?
I followed the Penske Gurjit thread for a while. That I would say that formed the backbone of my, let's call it my internal system of self-administration, how I regulated or governed myself. I was really into martial arts from about 13 on. It's the only sport that I showed any talent for. I was actually playing. I played soccer. I was going to say American football. No, I played non-American football for a while, and really the only thing I was good at was knocking the other kids over. And then eventually, like, I don't know, my parents were like, you gotta play a sport, you gotta do something. And so I was like, okay, I'll go to this. I will go to the martial arts school, which is next to the bowling alley at the strip mall. And anyway, and I started going, and then I started getting praised for knocking people over. And so that was life changing. But anyway, how that connects to Gurdjieff Penske and all that is it's very, a lot of the fourth way stuff is very will focused. And that was sort of the one thing that I was being trained in. I was being trained in the Korean military style of Taekwondo. It was, basically there was an American GI who was stationed in Korea, trained with the Korean military, came back and started teaching people in Ohio, right? And so in any military context, you often have a lot of focus on will. It wasn't like gather your chi and find inner peace, but will is an important component of many magical or spiritual systems, and the focus on will in the Gurdjieff material and in my martial arts school resonated for me. And I was also just not in a great place literally, and I also wasn't a very happy teenager. And so there was a fair amount of gritting my teeth and getting on to the next part of life. And so, the Ouspensky Gurdjieff stuff was interesting. I recognize now that he actually imported a lot of he imported a lot of concepts from a lot of different systems. But what's interesting to me now is I can look back and see how he took a lot of internal alchemy practices, which I know primarily through the sort of the Chinese angle, because I've been doing internal Chinese martial arts and Qigong for well over a decade now. But he took a lot of those practices and then sort of simplified them into his own metaphor. And so there is an alchemical conception of powering the self that you see in Gurdjieff, where one of the things he says is he presents meditative practice as sort of an energy efficiency practice. He's like, listen, you've only got so much thinky juice. I think that was the term he used. And so, don't waste it on thinking a bunch of dumb shit. Don't waste it on reacting to, to some silly thing that happened this morning. Like save your ability to think for the things that are worth thinking, and the same for feeling. And so, yeah, there's this sort of energy efficiency, internal alchemy sort of paradigm which Gurdjieff sneaks into his work, and that affected me a lot. And that ended up being something which I pursued, again, through Chinese internal martial arts. But it wasn't a straight Gurjit. There's no straight line between Gurjit and that. That's something that I found through other means. And then looking back, I can say, oh, that element was there, and that was part of what hooked me.
He grew in my esteem on a reread, so I kind of know what you're talking about there. I was too young when, and I started with Beelzebub, which is deliberately...
Oh, terrible.
Yeah, but it's deliberately terrible. It's like, I'm going to write a shit book, so only good people, like only the right people can get to the end of it, and I am definitely not that person. But some of his other stuff has grown in my esteem on a reread, which means it was my fault on the first read through.
See, I started with The Master Game, which is a book by Robert DeRope, who is one of Ouspensky's students. Ouspensky is Gurdjieff's student. And Robert DeRope was this biochemist writing in the 60s and 70s. And The Master Game had this really compelling metaphor. This was a big turning point for me. It says, listen, there are... we can conceive of life and deriving meaning from life as having found a game worth playing. And he basically says, okay, there's the truth game, which is played by scientists. There's the beauty game, which is played by artists. And then there's the survival game, which is played by bankers. I believe he calls that pigs in the trough. He's like, and then there's the master game, which is the trying to embrace all of these, this sort of meta game of life. And I was like, well, that sounds like obviously the best choice. And so it was interesting because it presented this, a life with, hopefully a life played for truth and beauty and power, and that none of these things were exclusive. And that, I don't know, there's this implication that, you have these three things which are in many ways very close to the old school triune definition of a perfect God. But then you also have a distance from that. It's like to create a perfect self, but really to not care that much about being a self.
Yeah, there's like an emotional arm's length distance version of a literal Renaissance man in that, which is building out the whole thing and not playing one or the other. Also, he's kind of, if he calls one of them the master game, that's the one you want to play. That's like the
I would say
in the name.
It was a little leading.
Yeah.
My poor impressionable 16-year-old mind.
So, when did the astrology thing start? I mean, tell the story about how you sort of decided this was for you.
I was a very... let's see. I was a very bright and critical young man, and I thought astrology was total garbage until I was until about 5 years into practicing it, to be honest. The moment of astrology's sort of legitimate insertion into my life was actually through a video game. So there's this game called Final Fantasy Tactics, and it's this tactical squad level fantasy RPG, right? And every character was assigned a zodiac sign, and the interaction between the sign of one character, the interaction between two characters, like your percentage to hit the enemy with a sword, was modified by the relationship between the sign of that monster and the sign of your character. And so what they actually did is they modeled aspect doctrine, which are the different angles between the different signs on that wheel of 12, quite accurately. And so if signs were what we call trine, or at a 120-degree angle to each other, meaning that they're of the same triplicity or element, it would be easier for the two to affect each other. Anyway, so I ended up ingesting the 12 signs and their glyphs and their the meaning of their geometrical relationship to one another. And then I started noticing at work that these relationships, which were suggested by this model, seemed to be basically true, which I thought was very interesting and kind of funny. And okay, so I talked about going to college for painting, so that didn't last very long. I the painting department at the college that I went to is not very excellent. But they had a really good social science department, and I really enjoyed taking philosophy classes. So I was studying psychology, and I was very interested in different ways of modeling human personality, right? The various typing systems. And so I started exploring astrology as sort of a pre-modern typing system for personality. And that was sort of the excuse that allowed me to investigate it. I was like, oh, it's a way of modeling the personality. I don't have to believe that there's any sort of divinatory or predictive power. I can just look at this as an interesting model. And that ended up, and so I went to a very small college, and I ended up, looking at having like 100 people's charts on file. I knew what was going on with everybody, and I would do like, I wouldn't even call them readings, but I would talk to people about what little I understood regarding their chart. I think I would usually do that for an order of General Tso's chicken. That was my standard fee. But the more I got into it, the more I came to find that there was something very strange going on besides playing a fun game. I had some experiences where I ended up predicting a death very precisely, and I would never just do that in a reading before. I was like, oh, the symbols suggest, it looks here like you lost a close male friend in a high-speed motor vehicle accident recently. And then it happened to the person 2 weeks after I said that. And then I realized that I should probably take it seriously and not say things like that to people.
Unless they ask?
Unless they ask. That I think that is a really crucial component of divination. Is what is the person asking you? What do they want to, what do they want / need to know? Because there's one of the things that Friedrich Nietzsche said that I've always thought highly of was wisdom sets limits to knowledge, which is kind of Lovecraftian in its own way.
Yeah.
But
the pro old ones camp.
Right. So let's imagine for a second that we have a perfect system of divination where any part of your life in the future can be known perfectly. Would it be helpful to have all of that knowledge? And I think the answer is no. But there are certain things that are extremely useful to know ahead of time. And figuring out what's useful to know and what isn't is a part of reading for people. But it's primarily an important, I would say it's of utmost importance for being a good practitioner of a divination system. Because one of the things I see with people when they get really into astrology is once they get a basic proficiency, they start becoming obsessed with something that look like something really terrible. It looks like something really terrible is going to happen in 19 years. And whether or not they're correct about that is a very poor use of your time and energy. And so, you have to figure out like what is worth knowing, what's important to know, if you're going to become really proficient at a system that provides some level of foreknowledge. Does that make sense?
It does. It kind of circles back to what you were saying about having a finite amount of thinky juice, which is the scientific term.
Yes, absolutely.
Something like astrology, when you're talking about the slow-moving planets, you can see something quite bad, as you say, 19 years out, and you go, how many fucks do you want to give about that now?
Right. Well, and it forces you to confront this kind of, knowing that that Saturn's on a schedule. It forces you to remember the finity of every portion of life, that there's no like things are going great. This isn't the way it is. Okay, let me back up. There's one of the errors in thinking that some schools of Buddhism address is the error of thinking that they call it eternalizing, or it's translated as eternalizing, where like things are on an upswing, and you're like, this is the way it is now. This is how it's going to be, or things have turned south for you. And things are it's not going well. And you say, oh, I guess this is this fake truth of depression where things are awful, and then you're like, oh, this is the way it really is, right? And those are both eternalizing. You're both turning something which is temporary into the way it is. They become the grand narrative, and the practice of astrology is very good. Sort of immunization or inoculation against that tendency to eternalize, that tendency to think, oh, this is the way it is. You can actually be like, oh, this is the way it is for about 5.5 more months, which may or may not be uplifting. But once you get good, you can do that pretty accurately.
Speaking of getting good, then, returning to the incident you were just talking about, you know a lot more about astrology than I do, but I'm struggling to recall the sign for motor vehicle accidents. So was that a realization that there is a component that the astrologer brings to a session that uses astrology but maybe comes from elsewhere?
Oh, I think that, so that delineation was pretty by the book. Basically this person had a Moon-Mars conjunction in Sagittarius that was getting stressed by a couple other planets, and it was in the third. The third is the area of life around town. Like when you go to the grocery store, or the gas station where you live, that's your third house. It's like your neighborhood, and so. Actually, I'm not going to do all this. This will take 5 minutes, and it probably won't mean anything. That was actually pretty clearly there. That was a sort of by the numbers thing. However, the question you ask is valid. I think most astrologers will say that there's something that happens, not in every reading, but in a lot of readings that goes beyond the technical structure of astrology. It might be a bit exaggerated to say something comes through you, and it might be completely accurate. I actually do. I have a very brief, I don't even call it prayer. I call on particular spirits which have revealed themselves as liking me and being willing to work with me and concerned with divination before every reading. And I actually notice a difference with between the times where I do my, hey, can I get help from you guys for this person, and when I don't do that. But even people who don't have a more, a semi-formal practice like I do, have that experience of stuff coming through. One of the things that I think is really interesting that a lot of traditional astrological texts talk about is they talk about finding a radical question and a chart which addresses that radical question. And they use radical in the old way, meaning a question that is rooted. They want the question to be rooted in the soul. And then when somebody comes to you with a question that's rooted as deeply as possible within them, that to a certain degree empowers you to answer it in a way that you are not empowered to answer a frivolous question.
I like that because that bringing something else occurs even in tarot readings. But when it comes to astrology, however you want to characterize it, I mean, it is an occult podcast, there is something about the space stories that are necessarily bigger and not well understood. So the sort of a fallback on a kind of Brian Eno unconscious model of describing how tarot works can be used to some extent with astrology, but then there's the other part of it, which is, well, these things have been important and run and seen civilizations rise and fall for quite some time. So you're playing on a cosmic sized game board rather than a card table. And I was just kind of interested in where that come from, because for me, reading your sort of previous almanacs, I can definitely tell that there is that visionary component of being in the right space to be visionary or prophetic in a way that, I mean, they must be fascinating. We'll get onto them later, but it's interesting to read them as it comes into November and December and go, this content is a year old and it's working quite well.
Yeah. They the statement you made about finding a space to be visionary or prophetic is really interesting. I think it's easier for me to find that with writing, because I'm alone.
Yeah.
And it's probably more amazing when it happens with another person there. But it's a lot more complicated, right? With the addition of just one more person, you're multiplying the variables. What's interesting is if you're just using the technical language of astrology, what you get out of that is almost like it's almost like a computer, in that it's very non-human. You get like, the event will occur between this and this date. It will be unfavorable from the position of the person. It will involve excessive heat. It might be characterized by, you get all this information that you have to then humanize. You have to say, like, okay, well, what kind of thing is that? What is that actually going to be? It's going to have these 7 qualities and occur in this time frame and probably be experienced as positive. But then you have to kind of take that computer readout and see what it might be, or see the range of possibility, and see the discrete bounded range of events which fit those categories. If that makes sense.
It does.
It doesn't sound like madness.
It's data analytics. You've kind of got a readout, and you need to turn that into, and that's the part I think a decent astrology brings. You need to turn it into something that humans can understand, because otherwise, as you say, it's a string of numbers.
Right, and you can check that and be like, yes, that was favorable. Yes, it involved excessive heat. But it's like, oh, that was like getting invited out to a cool party at the beach. Right.
So, I mean, does that sort of thing builds over time? Because when I'm so much better with tarot decks that I've been using for 20 years and I keep buying them, even though I know this, but rather than ones that I've bought recently, because the cards have their book meanings, if you will. But with 20 years of practice, I know that card also means that in certain situations. So for you, I mean, we're going from, let's pick the story back up from college, about where you went with astrology, because I presume that was kind of one of the things you were getting at, that what particular configurations have historically meant, so you can kind of contextualize forecasts in that sense.
Yeah. So let's see. So, I read everybody's chart for cheap Chinese food in college. And then there was this shift in me, like the last maybe 3 months that I was in college. So I couldn't pick between getting a degree in philosophy or social science. So I double majored, and they made me do a senior thesis for both of those. And it was when I was working on both of those at once and getting really tired of it that I would actually start writing about astrology. I was like, man, I would rather do this. I don't want to do an advanced. I was looking at what the trajectory would be to like be a philosophy professor or to work in the psychological field. And I was like, oh, I don't want to do either of these things. I just want to sit around and do qigong and do astrology. And then the next 2 years after college, when I did get my degrees, I grounded out. Um, Saturn was on my moon. It was unpleasant, but I just kind of went full on. I moved to the northeastern United States just to study Tai Chi and Kung Fu, and I just did astrology. And that's actually also when I got really in. That was when magic came into my life because I had exhausted the potential of the local used bookstore for astrological material. But I took one step over into the occult section and I found books by Crowley, and a lot of them had astrological symbolism in them. I recognized the glyphs, and I was like, this seems like more, so I'll pick these up. And so it was sort of like looking for something beyond the astrology books, which have been published since the 60s. And so that ended up being this sort of side door into magic.
And was it Crowley to start? You mentioned, I mean, you probably found Magic in Theory and Practice or Book 4 or something. And is that where you started your foray into the occult?
Yeah, so let's see. I think at that bookstore, I picked up Magic in Theory and Practice, a nice hardback for like $2. And I also got 777, right? I was like, ooh, tables of correspondence. I know how to use these. I knew how to use them in a divinatory context. I didn't know how to use them in an active, in the sort of active assemblage creating sorceress context. And then, yeah, and I got that modern magic book, the big blue thing with the wizard on the cover.
Yep.
And I started mucking about with that. But really, what my first really profound experiences with what we're generally calling magic came from the Tai Chi and Kung Fu school I was at. There's a big emphasis on doing Wu Chi meditation. Do you know what Wu Chi is?
I do not.
So Wu Chi is basically the Chinese term for the chaos before creation. It's considered the primordial or original state out of which the sort of binary progression, which is mapped by the I Ching, proceeds, right? So it's a pre-dual state. And so for a while after college, I kind of barely had a job. I would do a little gardening or home improvement stuff. Basically I would just do chores for people for enough to to get rent. Or I worked for the company who owned the apartment building that I lived in. And I would just sit around and meditate for hours and hours and hours and hours and hours. And even though I accessed this through a Taoist tradition, there's nothing particularly sect-oriented about doing Wu Chi meditation, like returning to that primordial state. And so a lot of, as I think most people discover, if you can actually get to that fertile void, tons and tons and tons of weird shit gets born out of that. And so I started having these really overwhelming visions, experiences of particular spirits that I was forced to look to texts that we would consider magical in order to understand what the hell was happening and how should I interact with these figures.
And what interpretation did you land on, and has that interpretation held?
Well, I mean, each one is kind of its own story. Well, for one thing, there were particular, we can call them spirits, that were emerging very clearly that came from mythologies that I had never studied, which is very strange to encounter, like very living, overwhelming sort of spirits that are from traditions that you're not only not initiated in, but you've never even heard of. Like there were several figures that I came to recognize and name from Haitian and New Orleans styles of voodoo. But I'd never studied any of that. I don't have that in my family, and so I was very confused that they would be the ones who were showing up, and then learning some protocols for dealing with each of those spirits, and that it was actually a very positive thing, and they provided a lot of help. But I didn't know offer rum and tobacco and these things. So I would say that each one of those initial sort of emergence experiences where something comes into your life was sort of its own problem to solve, in the sense of, okay, what do I do with this now? And there wasn't just like, okay, here's the protocol for dealing with the entirety of that world. I would say the emergence of each figure necessitated some adaptation and learning on my part.
And so after that sort of first foray into magic, did you try to model both of these things, the astrological component and the spirit component, together at one time? Did you have like a Pseudodionysius moment of trying to put these things together?
I don't know. I still don't think I have put it all together. I try to allow it all the space to exist within me, as well as within possible maps of reality. But I think I would probably have to get all kind of Hegel and create giant tables, and I don't know. I'm a little suspicious of that, of like trying to well, let me back up. I am suspicious of grand narratives, like a good postmodernist. I'm suspicious of totalizing systems, but at the same time, there is always a tension between two different life experiences which are not entirely conceptually coherent. And I would say that tension, like letting yourself want to have one map for all of the territory while recognizing that there are many errors to be made there, and that you might not be able to create a map and should still let things exist even if they don't make sense yet. That tension where things are pulling apart and trying to push together is, I think, a very creative space. It's a very living space. You can't get stuck there. And so I would say I end up there most of the time.
Nice. Does that mean, because I mean, the next question was going to be, how does astrology work, do you think?
I think, so that's a great question. I think there are a couple things that make astrology very unique. So on one hand, astrology has some strictly divinatory components, right? Where we can liken it to a type of sortilege, like reading cards or bones or shells, right? And there's some people who use that as their primary or only model for understanding astrology. But astrology has this really, 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 really different method of operation where we can look at an ephemeris and we can know where the planets are going to be in 2,000 years. And so in a sense, the cards have already been thrown, right? Like their arrangement is knowable. And if we're looking at a natal chart, right, it's sort of like, okay, you get one tarot reading and that's it forever. It's a little bit more complicated than that. But we have, the signifiers are attached to physical bodies which have a very predictable, very regular type of movement. And so that's really different from throwing the bones or shells or cards or, whatever you want to show. And so there's also, so that puts it in a different category. And then there's also this question of, like, what is the mechanism by which the planets signify or cause events to happen? And in the Aristotelian sort of lineage of astrology, which is some of the history of astrology, they go for a pretty basic causal sort of mechanism. Then there's the sort of more Platonic model where it's sort of vertical metaphysical causation, right? And then there's the sort of sloppy modern Jung answer, which is it's synchronicity, bro. And what's fascinating to me is that there are obviously some parts of astrology which are just purely, we can call them synchronistic, or it's a metaphysical, Platonic, vertical causation. But then there are other elements that are really pretty obviously physical. Like most of the sun's characteristics in astrology come from all of the facts about the sun, right? Like they're not. The sun is illuminating and invigorating because it's a giant nuclear ball of light. And then there are even some more, day has a meaning which is distinct from night based on all these physical facts. And the moon really does pull on the waters of the earth gravitationally. The sun really does pound us, with radiation. And so these physical factors are not in and of themselves sufficient to explain what people do with astrology, but we can't say that those aren't relevant or that's not a piece of it. So yeah, astrology is this really strange hodgepodge, elegant synthesis, strange hodgepodge, perhaps both, of different factors, causal and acausal, and physical and non-physical. And so, short answer, I don't know how it works.
So, fair enough. I like inelegant synthesis. Let's go halfway in between the two, because some of it is inelegant. Like how the second rock out from the sun, which, as you said, does have some physical characteristics that are observable, how that came to be associated with love and venereal disease and so on, must land somewhere in between Platonic and Jungian, surely.
Yeah. Well, part of Venus's symbolism comes from the fact that Venus is brighter than pretty much anything else in the sky except the moon when she's at her brightest. And so that's something, right? You're going to note the brightest thing in the sky. One thing that's really fascinating to me is how ancient Mesopotamians looked at Jupiter, right? They say, okay, that's Marduk's planet, right? So Marduk is, Marduk is storm guy, weather guy, lightning guy, king guy. And so they pick for the king planet, the biggest planet, which you can't tell from Earth without a telescope. You don't know if that thing's bigger than Saturn in 1000 BC. And they're like, oh yeah, it's the storm guy, it's the lightning guy. Well, you know that Jupiter has the largest electromagnetic field in the solar system by far. The field actually extends 1,000,000 miles out towards Saturn. 1,000,000 miles, right? So they're like, oh yeah, that's the lightning guy. He's got the electromagnetic charge. And so you can go, you get to these sort of identification of planets with deity figures that are sometimes just absurd. Like they're so uncanny. It's amazing. There's just absolutely no way you could do that based on observation through the senses.
Well, so that sort of, I've written a book that kind of goes into a bit of this, but that lends, it's a much more late night conversation, but that suggests that there is potentially something else quite profound in how astrology works, quote unquote, that probably lands in the Jung camp, but in the Red Book Jung sense. I'm struck by the fact that I've shared it on the blog, but there's Xenon 129 in the Martian atmosphere, which is a weapon signature of a nuclear bomb or a nuclear weapon that's 500 million years old. So the war planet appears to have been bombed, which is another interesting one. You go, wait a minute.
Right. And also, Mars is red because of the iron in the soil oxidizing. What's the planetary metal for Mars? Oh, it's iron.
Yeah. So that's kind of, I was wondering if we'll have to do a Rune Soup Up Late podcast to kind of get into that, because I think there is a component to astrology. This was how, because much like you, but in a different way, I spent a lot of time poo-pooing astrology, even while slightly using it. And my route back into giving it a second and then a third look was the specific astronomical information available, or even just space-based information available in some of the world's oldest texts that makes you think, well, wait a minute. As you know, it's not a Sitchin podcast. They're not space aliens coming down to mine gold to save their atmosphere. But nevertheless, this information is there at the base of some very important civilizations. And for me, that was where it comes back around to, I'm not sure how this works yet. I'm sure people 5,000 years ago had an opinion of it, which may be accurate or not, but it certainly, for me, warranted a second or third look. And that happened about 5 years ago, and it's been a very worthwhile second or third look.
Yeah. One of the things I wanted to make sure to talk to you about is, a lot of my cool occult friends have gotten really into looking down in maybe the last 5 years. There seems like there's been an increasing emphasis on the spirits of place, the genus loci, and perhaps what is even below.
Yeah, underworld. The chthonic is the club to be in at the moment.
Right. Whereas, I was thinking about this the other day, and I realized I was like, oh, what are you looking at with astrology? It's like, oh, those are the spirits of time, right? And the way that to find anything that exists, you have to locate it in space and time, and that those are, that's in a sense that's the heavens and the earth, because we are, all of our measures of time are inherently celestial. Like the year is the sun-earth cycle. The day, which is our probably first unit of time that every culture discovers, is another sun-earth relationship. And certainly everybody noticed the visible lunar cycle. And so, it's out of all of that our ability to cut time into discrete units emerged. And that, there's a meaningful juxtaposition there between the spirits of place and the spirits of time.
Well, yeah, especially if we want to get kind of, not New Age about it, but sort of Star Trek spirituality about it, that space-time is the one surface in kind of modern physics. So you do actually require both for the triangulation. I know what you're talking about. I chatted to Jake about this a bit, but you notice this particularly in Egypt and in Old Kingdom Egypt, but they had an awareness of where the stars went during the daytime. So the reason Nuit shows up on the inside of coffins from the beginning of the Middle Kingdom is she ate the sun. She sleeps underground. She is an underworld spirit that comes out at night. So if not the planets, then the stars retain a lot of this lore that even if, your cool occult friends and mine are going underground for a spell, they're just going to dig down and find the stars anyway.
Yes, absolutely. A very simple and near universal answer to the question, where does the sun go at night, is the underworld. Correct.
And that's why you find, so for instance, Egypt had a Sothic year, the return of Sirius. You have the dipping below the horizon for 70 days, which tied in with the mummification cycle. So the different stars in the night sky get much of their meaning from the fact that they spend time in the underworld, which is also why the imperishable stars in the north have such a different meaning, because they didn't. And so there's a lot of information about there's a lot of, and this is my book, but there's a lot of information that's retained in the stars that goes back a lot further than the arbitrarily decided date of about 1000 to 500 BC for the quote unquote creation of astrology. It's not correct. You see the planets rise into prominence through Mesopotamia, but star lore and using stars to tell stories and measure time is 50,000 years old.
Absolutely. So the creation of what is formerly called horoscopic astrology, where you take a chart, you take the chart of a particular nativity and use that to prognosticate. That's first century, maybe second century BC.
For sure.
That's actually, and what's interesting about that is that the technical structure is basically what we do now. It's been through wars and a lot of different languages, and it's basically the same. And that synthesis, our horoscopic astrology is like this synthesis of Greek, Mesopotamian, and Egyptian material. But that material, especially as you say, the star lore, has roots which reach back so much further than the written word does. Because it's just, it started when people began looking up at night.
And in the Ice Age, there's no light pollution, there's no water in the air because so much of it is locked up in the ice cap. So if you try to picture what the night sky would have looked like on the Eurasian plains 15,000 years ago, that to call that your TV, which I've done before, is true enough, but there's nothing quite like that on TV at the moment.
No. I wanted to jump back to the point we're talking about underworld, right? So right now, Mercury is in his retrograde phase relative to us, right? So what's interesting is whenever an inner planet, whenever Venus or Mercury is in the retrograde phase, that actually means it's between us and the sun. It's actually closest to us during those periods, and they're what's usually mapped. And so what that means is whenever Mercury retrogrades, it also means he disappears. So if you look at the evening sky, like, half an hour or 15 minutes after the sun sets, right before Mercury retrograde, you will see Mercury appear fleetingly on the western horizon. And then he disappears for like 3 weeks, and then he pops up on the eastern side and heralds the sunrise. And so, what was people's answer for where did Mercury go while he was missing? Well, he went to the underworld. And so this is, a lot of folks model the Mercury as psychopomp or Hermes Catonios onto that cycle of disappearance and reappearance. And Venus does the same thing, but only about every year and a half. And so for Venus, there's a very good case that the whole Inanna cycle of myths, with her leaving her throne in the heavens and descending to the underworld to meet her dark sister and then emerging again, is actually, it's not just the Venus retrograde cycle, but that it's modeled around that. That the narrative is actually modeled on the sequence of events which happens every year and a half.
Yeah, agreed. I would go further than very good case to almost case closed. That is how they timed the telling of the story, whether...
yes, timing the telling of the story.
Yeah. So that's you're going to enjoy my book, put it that way. But speaking of Mercury retrograde, we got like 15 minutes left. So question one, how would you advise people who are magically operative to quote unquote cope with a particularly dickish retrograde? Do you think like planetary propitiation, like you find in the Picatrix works, that kind of thing?
Well, okay, so if you're going to do it like in the Picatrix, two models, right? One is the propitiation model. Oh my God, you're so nasty. If I give you this, will you leave me alone, right? That's not really in the Picatrix. The Picatrix, I mean, it's a big volume, but the Picatrix is basically waiting until a planet is in perfect condition and able to grant many wishes, and then timing the moment to wish upon that star. So in some ways, the Pegatrix is just like, oh yeah, don't touch it if it's retrograde and combust and afflicted by Saturn. So you have this only the best sort of idea. Only pick the fruit when it is ripest idea in the Pegatrix. As far as difficult positions go, or difficult cycles, I do propitiation during every Mercury retrograde, and during a lot of other difficult things. I think so. I do know magicians who claim that they do this and they're totally insulated because their magic is perfect. But I also know what actually happens in their lives.
Yeah.
I know that is not accurate.
Yeah.
But I do. There is something to be said to leaning into it.
Yeah.
One example from Mercury's cycle is that we have a specific name and role for Hermes when he's in the underworld, right? And there are all sorts of different sort of figures you can use for that besides the Greek form. But it's a psychopomp. It's the underworld messenger. He's the shady dude at the crossroads, rather than the helpful the helpful guide. And that to a certain degree, by approaching that figure consciously, you at least have a guide for the underworld rather than stumbling lost and alone. I don't think that it means that you don't. It doesn't mean that you get to avoid the tunnels. It just means that you're probably going to be better at going through the tunnels.
That's been my experience, particularly with Mercury. But if you look at what various retrogrades govern, and another one that Mercury retrograde governs is communication with people from the past. And so you can kind of, for me anyway, I've got this intuitive model going where if it looks like it's going to be particularly shit retrograde of one or the other, I make sure it has a conduit to express itself in my life, kind of like releasing water from a dam that isn't really fucked. So I'll do the propitiation, but I'll also make sure that there are ways for the retrograde to show up in my life that I don't necessarily control, but are preferable to having my, MacBook catch fire.
Yeah, absolutely. There's this whole sort of hydrodynamic theory of managing influences, right? Where you give it a place to go. And it's actually, it's really good for some things. Like if I were going to schedule a necromantic operation to address the spirits of my ancestors, I would probably want Mercury to be in his underworld phase.
Exactly. Hydrodynamic. Did you learn that at painting school, college boy?
No.
No, it's just a thing I know.
The pressure and things going different places.
Fair enough. Okay, so it's 2016. So we have some questions about what's coming up this year.
Okay.
Is Donald Trump going to be your president?
I don't think so. I certainly hope not. I haven't looked. So the thing about astrology is you can know lots of things, but it takes a lot of work to arrive at a sound judgment. And so I just don't have enough time to spend looking at, 10 different political charts. I think just I don't know. I don't know. I think it's unlikely based on non-astrological factors.
Yeah.
But I haven't studied the matter in depth.
You're going to be thinking about it now, though. You're going to be thinking, I wonder what is the minimum credible number of charts I can do to be confident that that's not going to happen?
No, it's a rabbit hole, and you either go in and come out with an answer with, that having taken as long as it does, or you don't.
All right, cool. So less facetiously, 2016, what are the high notes from space that we should be looking at?
Okay, I would say there are two. I can boil a lot of it down to two factors. One is that we have a lot of, maybe three factors. There are going to be a lot of planets in mutable signs this year, an unusual number. And so mutable is one of the three modes that the signs can be. signs are considered either to initiate activity, to maintain it with fixity, or to switch things up and change things. And so obviously mutable is the changeable power. And so when you have an abundance of planets in mutable signs, things continue to change very quickly. It's, how things are one month is not going to be a good barometer for how they are going to be the next month. Uh, you get a lot of people freaking out about stuff that leads to nothing. Because it's just this week, and then next week you get a different thing. I would say that it rewards 2016 will reward a person's adaptability, the ability to stay calm and be adaptable. It's not necessarily the fixity of purpose under all adverse circumstances that is highlighted this year. As far as configurations go, we have Saturn and Neptune are at a 90-degree angle for a lot of this year. And so Saturn and Neptune have a 36-year cycle. And the phase of the cycle that we're at right now last happened in 79 and 80. It's really big on crushing dreams on a collective level. There's a lot of there's a lot of so Saturn is sort of the three-dimensional reality principle, and Neptune is sort of is in many ways corresponds to the reality principles of the dreamland or the dreaming. And so in this particular phase, we have Saturn in a superior position to Neptune, and so it means that a lot of fond illusions get crushed. A lot of times you have a disillusionment is a very common collective attitude during this part of the cycle. For the United States, that was the failure of Jimmy Carter. Like, we finally got a good guy. Like, we finally got a decent person as a president, and it didn't work in the way that people wanted it to work. Another thing that's interesting about Saturn and Neptune is Saturn corresponds to boundaries and limits, and Neptune represents the power of let's say, the ocean or of water to seep in through all of the cracks. Neptune's inherent function is to dissolve boundaries, and Saturn's is to establish boundaries. And so we have, as a dynamic, this struggle between those factors which seem like they're impossible to contain and the need for boundaries. On a political level, we have a refugee crisis, and the Saturn-Neptune thing started about halfway into 2015 and runs throughout this entire year. We also had refugee crises 36 years ago. But anyway, the point of that is just that you have this tension between the need for boundaries and who gets through what gate under what circumstances, right? There should always be a gate in any wall. Like, Saturn is very much the lord of gates. But most gates need to be attended to. And so figuring all that out on both a personal level as well as a collective level. On a personal level, that Saturn-Neptune thing is generally about figuring out what it looks like for a lot of people is having a fond dream or desire in one area of their life, but needing to do a bunch of work, sort of settle the foundations and a concrete issue in another part of their life before they can really get to the dream. And in some cases, there's a mixing of the two, and a sorting or a solve is necessary. You need to separate, what is solid and what is concrete and what is actionable from what may or may not be a realistic thing. In general, it has to do with the confusion between the quote-unquote real and what is dreamt of. So you just, it's basically great for people being extra crazy and extra delusional, because you don't have to do this process of separating the two if they're not all mixed up together.
Well, that certainly sounds like no.
Yeah, and then the thing that's coming up, the third factor, and just doing a really quick overview here, is we're going to have Mars retrograde from April 16th or 17th until the end of June. And so Mars's retrograde phase only comes every 2 years. And this one should be particularly violent and nasty on a collective level. It's going to be a good year for another good year for war. The cycle that we're going into now, which is Mars stationing retrograde on. He actually stations retrograde right next to the heart of the Scorpion. Which is at 8 degrees of tropical Sagittarius, and then retrogrades back to about 23 degrees of tropical Scorpio. And, we get fun things like the bombing, which precipitated the painting Guernica in the Spanish Civil War under this Mars retrograde cycle. It's a lot of really straightforward, unfettered Mars. The cycle that we're coming out of with Mars, which is run for about 2 years, saw Mars in tropical Libra. And so with Mars in Libra, you see warfare through subtlety, diplomacy, alliance making. And it's a lot of passive aggressive moves, right? Like, so the day that Mars stationed retrograde in 2014 was the day that Putin annexed the Crimea. Right, which is not war. It's like, no, this is Russia. This has been ours for a while. That's okay with you guys, right? You're not going to like bomb us because of that, right? There's a lot of the subsequent aggression and in the Ukraine. It was like, oh, it's not a real war. We're just defending our interests in this area. And so you have this sort of, and it's funny because Putin actually has, I think 4 planets that were in late Libra that were highlighted by that Mars retrograde. But we're moving out of this sort of maneuvering and strange alliance making, right, where the U.S. and Cuba get reconciled-ish, and the U.S. and Iran actually make a deal. You have weird bedfellows with this Mars and Libra cycle. But the one that we're coming up on that we'll get into this second quarter is going to be much more, I think, open hostility. I think we're going to get back to a less varnished version of the game.
I see. Good to know. If people want to know more specifically about that, where might they find you?
Well, my website is just myname.com. It's austincoppock.com. I actually don't have that written up right now. I did a podcast, the Astrology podcast, where I talk about 2016 with 2 of my colleagues. We talk for like 2 hours. It's just the Astrology podcast, the Astrology of 2016. And then I do a weekly column. I started doing a weekly column again this year. I wrote a weekly column for I think about 8 years, and then I switched to a paperback format. We put out a year ahead of time, and now I've switched back because consistency is evil.
Yeah.
And I decided to experiment with this Patreon funding model, which you should probably consider for this podcast. It's basically like a subscription micro donation service where, basically somebody just pledges to give you $1 every time you put out a podcast. And it's non-mandatory. My column isn't inside a walled garden. But if you want to encourage me to do that and to do more, you can give me 50 cents every time I do something. It's a nice model. It seems like a good way around the ruins of publishing.
Yeah. Hey, I've got 2 books coming out. What are you talking about? It's fine.
Yeah, it's fine. Actually, these some of these small these sort of boutique occult presses, I think, are one of the ways through that wreckage. I published with Three Hands Press about a year and a half ago, and I had a great experience with that. I'm actually just finishing up a project with them now that is an anthology of essays about the historical and practical intersection between astrology and magic. That's going to be super duper badass. Your previous guest, Mr. Al Cummins, is is featured in it. We've got,
But it'll be good anyway.
oh yeah, right. Even though Al's in it, but yeah,
Sorry, Al.
we've got a great lineup of people. Some very prominent astrologers I've convinced to I've lured out of the broom closet, I think is what they say, admitting to dabbling in these terrible things, as well as a number of sort of primarily magical people like John Michael Greer, who co-translated the Picatrix, and Jason Miller, who does quite a bit with planetary magic. It's got a lot of perspectives, and we've got some of the essays have a lot of footnotes, and some of them are very practical advice for the practitioner. I'm really excited about it. It's going to come out, I think, sometime second quarter. We're finishing up the edits now.
Does it have a name yet, or
Oh,
should we tell you about that? You can come back and tell us about it later.
I hope so.
Nice. Well, that sounds really cool. Austin, thank you very, very much. I'm now mildly terrified about war, but otherwise the rest of it was absolutely fascinating and insightful and brilliant, and all those links you just mentioned will be up in the show notes. So thank you very much for your time, sir.
Oh, it was a pleasure.
Wonderful. And we'll definitely get you back on again.
Okay.
Okay. See you.
Bye.
Okay, so I think we can all agree that the highlight of today's episode was when Austin made a legally binding promise that Donald Trump would not become president. If you liked what you heard from this episode, then please do subscribe in iTunes, Stitcher, Pocket Cast, or on YouTube. I'd love to hear your thoughts on some of this week's topics, astrology obviously, but also star lore and the chthonic role of the stars and the planets, and I'd love to hear your own tips and tricks for managing retrogrades. Leave a comment on the blog at runesoup.com or on the Facebook page, facebook.com/runesoup, or hit me up on Twitter where I am Gordon, Gordon_White, WHITE. Until next time.